Hi friends, let's keep looking at some routines for the first weeks of music class. In the last video, we talked about an entrance procedure, and now let's think through some seating formations so that we are, to the very best of our ability, setting students up to be active and focused during music class. We'll take a look at how I personally set up my seating chart, but we'll also think about some guiding principles to keep in mind because all of our seating charts in our classroom, all of our seating arrangements in our classroom will probably be a little bit different. In an active classroom, we are probably going to be in a lot of different places around the room throughout the course of the lesson, but most likely we are going to have some type of home base seating arrangement. And normally in most music classes, that home base arrangement is normally either rows, so students are in a grid, or maybe they are on risers. And this is, from the teachers that I talk to, this is by far the most common seating arrangement. So it can be in rows, or we might also be in a circle or a semicircle or a horseshoe type of option. In my teaching, we sit in a circle for our home base, and here's a look at how it's set up. So I have numbers on these circles so students always know where their spot is when we have assigned spots. The circles are also in different colors, which lets me put students in small groups really easily. And then in the past, I've also drawn symbols on these circles as well. So like a half note or a do clef or something like that. And that gives me a second way to group students. So I might ask students to get in a group with their number or get in a group with their music symbol if they're not just choosing their own groups. In terms of focus, when it's time to face the board or another part of the room here, I can just say, turn your whole body to face me, or turn your whole body to face the instruments, or whatever it is. And then the class can be oriented anywhere and everyone can still see. Generally, for like a single point of focus, we are oriented toward the smartboard at the front of the classroom, but not always. Because you can see here, I also have whiteboards at the back, so I can do some direct instruction there. And I have some instruments along this wall, so that's somewhere that I might do some modeling or something like that. So having the class in a circle formation, that gives me a lot of flexibility in my teaching process because the front of the room isn't always necessarily the most important part of the room. In that same vein, thinking about flexible focus areas, this also means that I am free to move around the room and lead class from anywhere. So this is really useful in terms of classroom management. So if we're doing an activity and a student needs a little bit of extra support from me to be on task, I don't have to change anything. I don't have to call them out. I don't have to change the pace of my lesson. I just keep teaching and I can sit next to that student. And the flow of the lesson doesn't need to stop. So the proximity piece is really helpful since we're in a circle. And I will link a video somewhere up here about redirecting behavior in music class that has a little bit more detail on this process. In terms of space, some students benefit from having like more space around them, maybe because their bodies just need to move more, or maybe so that they don't get as distracted by the people next to them, whatever it is. I have 24 circles here and my classes are smaller than 24. So there is room for someone to be next to an empty dot if that is helpful. And then the other thing in terms of physical spacing that I should say here is that since this is the same formation from kindergarten all the way through 5th grade, it needs to accommodate very different sized bodies, right? A kindergartner is a very different size from a 5th grader. So with upper elementary, I can have them sit behind their dot instead of on their dot. So they still have a place, but it gives us all a little bit more room. This circle formation also mirrors my seating and assessment chart. So I have a place here for scores that I can document during the lesson itself so that assessment doesn't take up any extra class time. And here's an example of what that assessment chart might look like when it's filled in. Now, logistically, the vast majority of activities that we do in class happen in a circle. It's the formation for so many of our singing games, the majority of our singing games. So thinking about something like Charlie Over the Ocean, or Vamos a Jugar, or Button You Must Wonder, or Bow Wow Wow, or Apares y Nones, it just makes sense to me to already be in a circle because that's where we spend the majority of our time. But of course, we also use other formations as well. And so for that, I just add like stage markers to the floor as necessary. And this can change throughout the year, but generally it's helpful to have something for a long ways set and then something that can mark the center of the classroom. So long ways sets, those markers are for things like El Juego Chirimbolo or Alabama Gal or Come Through the Sawmill, something like that. And then something that marks the center of the classroom is good for a jumping game like Bingo Bongolo or Big Fat Biscuit. But it's also worth noting that most of the time when I am teaching up to these other games, like when I'm scaffolding the teaching process, normally that scaffolding happens with us in a circle as well. So since we are in a circle most of the time, it just makes sense for us to stay in a circle for our seating arrangement. Now, as far as other mile markers, in previous classrooms when I had more space, I kept instruments out on the floor all the time. So I also put markers on the floor for where specific instruments went so that when students picked them up to move them, to bring them, in the middle of the circle or work with small groups or anything like that, they always knew where to put them back. Now, all of our music classroom seating arrangements are going to look a little bit different, and that is for very good reason. The biggest reason is, of course, that we all teach in different rooms, and those rooms likely have slightly different layouts. So here are some principles that we can keep in mind as we decide how we want our seating arrangements to be set up. In my doctoral program, we talked about visibility, access, and tasks. So let's look at those. First, visibility. Can students easily see us and the classroom focal points? And this one's important, can we easily see students? So students need to be able to see us easily, and they also need to see any information that we are using for the lesson, right? And we also need to be able to see every student in class. That helps with withedness and active supervision. Withedness is our level of awareness of what's going on in the classroom. Because when we can easily notice those like low-level distracted behaviors, we are able to faster redirect them so that they are less likely to escalate into bigger behavior problems later. And this is related to that second term, active supervision. So it is just really, really important that everyone in the room, students and teachers, that we all have visibility. And for a lot of teachers, this visibility piece, this focus visibility piece, is the main reason that they really like to have students in rows. Because when students sit in rows, there is one clear, important person, and it is whomever is at the front of the room. Everyone's visual focus is directed to that one person. Now, in a circle formation, we talked about like kind of flexible areas of focus, right? And we talked about how students just turn their bodies to face whatever is at the front of the room at that particular moment. Next, access. Can students access everything that they need for the lesson? And can we easily change our proximity to students? Do we have access to students? So in an active music room, we are dealing with multiple media, right? Including movement and instruments. So we're going to think through how easy is it for students to move away from their spot and then back to their spot in like a movement activity, or how easily can they leave their spot and get an instrument and come back. We want a very clear pathway so that students have access to everything that they need. And this can happen in rows or it can happen in a circle. For rows, we just need to make sure that we have enough space between each student so that the people in the middle of the row, so they can leave and get out just as easily as the people on the sides of the rows. And we also want to make sure that we have access to everyone in class easily. So in general, there's a lot of research on this. In general, students tend to be more engaged when the teacher is close, and they tend to be a little bit less engaged when the teacher is further away. So, does the seating arrangement allow for the teacher to change their proximity easily to be with students who need more support? Again, this can happen in rows or it can happen in a circle. It can happen in a lot of seating formations, but for rows, this potentially can be a little bit tricky, and that just depends on spacing. So, the teacher can walk in between rows, but the proximity to students is not equally there. And it can be hard not to interrupt the flow of the lesson if the teacher is teaching and all of a sudden they need to be somewhere like next to someone in the middle of the row. That can be a little bit tricky. So the teacher has the most ability to be in close proximity to the students who are on the front and on the sides of those rows. So that's just something to keep in mind depending on the spacing of your classroom. Last is task. So are students set up for success musically? Does the physical arrangement of the room support the learning task? There are a lot of different tasks that we'll do in music. Sometimes we are seated, looking at the board, maybe reading notation, but hopefully that's not all we are doing. Hopefully the tasks in our music class are also things like moving or playing instruments or playing games or working with partners, things like that. Most musical tasks in our classroom also involve some level of ensemble awareness. That is, students need to be able to hear around them and be connected to what the other musicians are doing. So hopefully our seating arrangement is set up to support these ensemble skills. And this is another reason that teachers really like rows. It's very intuitive for students to do a musical task while they are watching the teacher, and the teacher can lead everything, whether that is reading notation from the board or layering in ostinati or doing a body percussion activity, whatever it is. And that is a very different sense, is a very different feeling from what we get in a circle, which is where students have a more of a sense of like the whole ensemble, because everyone in the circle can see each other and they can hear each other a little bit better. So there are very good reasons for choosing circles or rows or any other seating arrangement in our classrooms. And in reality, we can be seated in circles, and then we can be seated in rows, and then we can work in small groups around the room, and then we can be in concentric circles, and then we can be scattered individually in open space. We can go through all of those physical arrangements in one single lesson in an active music room. So it's not a question of which seating arrangement is best. It is a question of which seating arrangement is best for which particular music activity in the lesson, and then which arrangement we want to use as the home base. And this might change throughout different grades. It might also change throughout the year. And the principles of visibility and access and task can help us make some of those decisions. We'll keep talking about routines in the next video, but until then, here are some name games to use in the first weeks of school once students are in whatever seating formation you choose.